The big doors made of black stone opened slowly. Daniel Carter walked into the room where all the important people from across the galaxy sat waiting. The room was huge, with tall walls that reached up so high they seemed to touch the stars. Seats filled with strange beings from 1,000 different worlds lined the walls in rows that went up and up. Daniel looked like any normal human man. He was 52 years old, with gray hair starting to show at his temples. He wore a simple black uniform with no medals or fancy decorations. He was not tall or short, not strong or weak-looking. Most people would walk past him on the street without a second look. But everyone in this room knew who he was. They knew what he could do with just his words. The beings in their seats watched him walk across the floor. Some leaned forward to get a better look. Others whispered to the people sitting next to them. Fear showed in many of their eyes, even though Daniel carried no weapons. His hands were empty. No gun hung from his belt. No sword rested at his side. Yet these powerful leaders from across the galaxy were afraid of him. Commander HFY belonged to the Zephyrian race. His people were known as great warriors who had never lost a battle. He had blue skin and forearms, each one strong enough to crush steel. But his voice shook a little when he spoke to his helper sitting beside him. "That small human is the one everyone talks about?" HFY asked quietly. "He is the one who stopped the Corvin rebellion?" His helper nodded fast. The young Zephyrian had read all the reports. "Yes, Commander." He talked to their leaders for 3 days. When he was done, they gave up their fight and went home. No shots were fired. No one died. What about the mining company problem? HFY wanted to know more. The Stellar Mining Company controlled 5 star systems. They treated the people like slaves and took everything of value from their worlds. The company had the biggest army anyone had ever seen. Daniel Carter asked to meet with their board of directors. And HFY waited. He talked to them for 2 hours. Just 2 hours. When the meeting ended, the company packed up and left all 5 star systems. They never came back. HFY looked at Daniel again. The human was walking slowly toward the center of the room. He did not look around at all the staring faces. He did not seem worried or scared. He just walked like he was going to meet an old friend for lunch. How does he do it? HFY wondered out loud. Quotes, "No one knows," his helper said. "People say he can see into your heart. Others say he knows secrets about everyone. Some think he can control minds with his voice." At the front of the huge room sat Chancellor Mordith. He was the most powerful being in the Empire. His people, the Drakmari, looked like giant lizards that walked on 2 legs. Mordith was old, even for his long-lived race. His green scales had turned dark with age. His forearms were covered in golden rings that showed his high rank. When he spoke, his voice came out of speakers all around the room, so everyone could hear him in their own language. "Ambassador Daniel Carter," the Chancellor said. His voice was deep and strong. "Welcome." Daniel stopped walking when he reached the center of the room. He stood straight but not stiff. His hands stayed at his sides. "Thank you, Chancellor. You said this was urgent." "Yes." Mordith's yellow eyes looked down at the human. "We have a big problem. The outer worlds are fighting against us. They do not want to follow Empire law anymore. A man named Kale Drexus leads them. He has turned 17 star systems against us." Daniel did not speak. He just waited for more information. "Our warships have tried to stop them twice," Mordith continued. "Both times, Drexus beat our fleets and sent them running. We sent our best diplomats to talk with him." "What happened to the diplomats?" Daniel asked. "He killed them." The Chancellor's voice got harder. "All of them. He said the Empire only understands death and pain. He said he would give us both. A sound like wind blowing through leaves filled the room. It was the sound of many different beings, all talking at once in worried voices. The rebellion was bigger than most of them had known. 17 star systems was a lot of worlds. Millions of people lived on those worlds. How many people has he killed? Daniel wanted to know. The rebellion has cost us 50,000 soldiers, Mordith answered. But that is not the worst part. Drexus is not just fighting us. He is changing how people think about the Empire. Other worlds are starting to ask questions. They wonder if they should join him. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood the real problem. It was not about winning battles. It was about winning the war for people's hearts and minds. What do you want? Me to do? He asked. End this rebellion, the Chancellor said. Bring Drexus back under Empire control. Make the outer worlds remember why they need us. His voice got very quiet. Do whatever you have to do? Daniel thought for a moment. Around him, hundreds of alien faces waited to hear what he would say. I will need a ship, he said finally. A small one. No weapons, no soldiers, no guards. Senator. Crixala from the Hegemony Worlds stood up fast. She was tall and thin with silver skin that looked like metal. You want to go alone? To face the most dangerous man in the galaxy with nothing? Daniel turned to look at her. For just a second, something showed in his eyes. Something that made the senator step back and sit down quickly. It was not anger or fear. It was something much deeper and more dangerous. Words are weapons too, Senator, Daniel said in a calm voice. Sometimes they are the most dangerous weapons of all. They can start wars or end them. They can turn friends into enemies or enemies into friends. Most important of all, they can change how someone sees themselves. He looked back at Chancellor Mordith. I will leave tomorrow. The Chancellor nodded. It will be done, but Carter ... He paused. If you fail, we will have no choice. We will have to destroy those 17 worlds to stop this rebellion from spreading. Daniel's face did not change, but everyone in the room felt something cold touch their hearts when he spoke. I will not fail. As Daniel walked back toward the big doors, the room stayed quiet. No one spoke until he was gone. Then the talking started all at once. Some beings were excited. Others were worried. A few seemed afraid of what Daniel Carter might do to end this rebellion, but they all agreed on one thing. The most feared man in the Empire was going to war, and he was going to fight it with nothing but words. A small ship called Meridian came out of hyperspace near a red star. Daniel Carter sat in the pilot seat, looking out at the darkness of space. He had been traveling for 2 days to reach this place. This was the Arcturus system, the heart of Kale Drexus's rebellion. Before Daniel could even send a message, 3 big warships appeared around his little transport. They moved fast and pointed all their weapons at him. The ships were painted black with red markings that looked like lightning. These were rebel ships, and they were ready to fight. The radio crackled to life. A voice spoke with anger and suspicion. Unknown ship, you have entered the space of the Free Worlds Alliance. Tell us why you are here, or we will destroy you. Daniel reached for the radio button calmly. His voice was steady and clear. This is Ambassador Daniel Carter from Earth. I am here to speak with Kale Drexus. Silence filled the radio for a long time. Daniel could almost feel the rebel crews talking to each other on their ships. Finally, a different voice came through. The speakers. This voice was deeper and sounded like it belonged to someone used to giving orders. This is Admiral Brooke Hayes of the Third Fleet. Turn your ship around now, Ambassador. We know who you are. We know what you do to people who fight against the Empire. Daniel smiled a little. He had done his homework before coming here. Admiral Hayes, he said. You used to be Captain Hayes of the Imperial Navy's 7th Fleet. You lost 3 ships at the Battle of Kepler Station. The radio went quiet again. Daniel continued talking in the same calm voice. High Command did not listen to your battle plan. You told them the enemy was too strong, but they made you attack anyway. When you tried to save your remaining crew, they said you were a coward. They kicked you out of the Navy and destroyed your reputation. How do you know about that? Admiral Hayes's voice was tight with old pain and anger. Because I was there. Admiral, I read every report from that battle. I was the one who recommended that your court-martial be overturned. I wrote letters saying you were a good officer who tried to save lives. But by the time the Empire admitted its mistake, you were already gone. Daniel waited a moment, then added, I have been trying to fix that wrong ever since. The radio stayed. Quiet for 20 minutes. Daniel could see the rebel ships moving around his transport. They were talking to each other, trying to decide what to do with him. Finally, Admiral Hayes spoke again. Follow my ship to the planet. Any sudden moves, and we will blow you apart. Understood, Daniel replied. The trip to the planet's surface took an hour. Daniel looked out his windows at the world below as they descended. New Arcturus had once been a beautiful planet with blue oceans and green forests. Now he could see the scars of recent battles. Burned areas marked where Imperial forces had tried to land. Smoking ruins showed where cities had been bombed. But he could also see new things. Construction robots were building new settlements. Ships were landing with supplies and people. This was not just a military base. It was becoming a new home for people who had lost their old ones. When Daniel's ship landed at the spaceport, he was met by a full squad of rebel soldiers. They all carried weapons and looked ready for trouble. Leading them was a woman in a military uniform. She was tall with short brown hair and scars on her left cheek. This had to be Admiral Hayes. Daniel walked down his ship's ramp with his hands visible and empty. He moved slowly, so no one would think he was dangerous. Why? Admiral Hayes asked, without any greeting. Her voice was hard, but Daniel could hear the hurt underneath. Because you were right about Kepler Station, Daniel answered simply. The Empire lost 50,000 people because they would not listen to one of their best officers. That was wrong. Hayes stared at him for a long moment. Her scarred face showed surprise and confusion. You really tried to help me? Yes, but I was too late. The damage was already done. Daniel met her eyes. I do not expect you to forgive me, Admiral. I just hope you will let me speak with Drexus. Hayes was quiet as she thought about this. Around them, her soldiers waited for orders. Finally, she shook her head. He will kill you, she said. Drexus is not like the people you have dealt with before. He is not a businessman who cares about money. He is not a politician who wants power. He has lost everything that mattered to him. All he has left is anger and the need for revenge. Then, we have something in common, Daniel said quietly. Hayes looked at him again, this time seeing something different. What did you lose? Everything that made life worth living, Daniel answered. But that is a story for another time. Right now, I need to speak with Drexus before more people die. The Admiral studied his face for several more seconds. Then she nodded to her soldiers. Take him to the fortress. But watch him carefully. If he tries anything strange, shoot him. As they walked through the city streets, Daniel saw more signs of the rebellion's success. People were working together to build new buildings. Children played in parks, while their parents watched with hope in their eyes. These were not the faces of people who wanted to destroy the Empire out of hatred. These were people who wanted to build something better, but Daniel also saw the fear. Guards stood on every corner. Weapons were hidden but ready. Everyone knew that the Empire would come back, and next time they might not be so lucky. How many people live here now? Daniel asked Hayes as they walked. 2 million on this planet alone, she answered. Most of them are refugees from worlds the Empire destroyed or abandoned. They have nowhere else to go. And they all follow Drexus? Hayes nodded. He saved them when no one else would. He gave them hope when they had none. They would die for him. Would they live for him? Daniel asked. The question seemed to surprise Hayes. She looked at him with new interest. What do you mean? Dying for someone is easy when you have nothing left to lose. Living for someone, building something that will last beyond their lifetime, that is much harder. They reached the fortress that served as rebel headquarters. It was a massive building made of gray stone, with towers that reached high into the sky. Daniel could see weapon platforms on the walls and soldiers patrolling the battlements. This was not just a home for Drexus. It was a symbol of the rebellion's strength. As they entered the main building, Hayes spoke quietly to Daniel. Fair warning. Drexus is not the man he used to be. The Empire took everything from him. His world, his family, his future. He has nothing left but rage and the need to make the Empire pay for what it did. What did they take? Daniel asked. Hayes stopped walking and turned to face him. Her eyes were sad and angry at the same time. His daughter. She was just 16 years old. Daniel felt something cold touch his heart. He thought about his own daughter, lost so many years ago. How did she die? Imperial bombardment of Colony 7. The Empire said they were targeting smugglers, but everyone knows the truth. They were trying to scare other worlds into submission. 4,000 civilians died in that attack, including Luna Drexus. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. He knew that name. He knew that attack. He had been the one who classified the intelligence that led to the bombardment of Colony 7. Are you all right? Hayes asked, seeing his face go pale. Daniel took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. I am fine. Let us go meet with Drexus. As they walked toward the command center, Daniel's mind raced. He had come here to stop a rebellion with words. But now he realized that his words might not be enough. Because sometimes the truth was more dangerous than any lie. And the truth about Colony 7 was something that might get him killed before he could say anything else. The fortress city of New Arcturus showed the marks of war everywhere Daniel looked. Burned buildings stood next to new construction sites. Imperial facilities that had been destroyed were being rebuilt as rebel headquarters. People moved through the streets with purpose, but Daniel could see the worry in their faces. They had won battles, but they knew the war was far from over. Admiral Hayes led Daniel through the fortress corridors. The walls were thick stone that could stop most weapons. Rebel soldiers stood guard at every intersection, watching the human diplomat with suspicious eyes. They had heard stories about what Daniel Carter could do with just his words. Some of them looked afraid. The command center is just ahead, Hayes said as they walked. Remember what I told you. Drexus is not like other men. The Empire destroyed everything he cared about. All he has left is anger and the need for revenge. Daniel nodded, but said nothing. His mind was still focused on what Hayes had told him about Colony 7. He remembered that day clearly. He had been sitting in his office on the Imperial Capital World, reading intelligence reports about smuggling operations. The report had said that Colony 7 was being used as a base for illegal activities. It had recommended immediate military action. Daniel had signed the authorization without visiting the colony himself. He had trusted the intelligence. He had made the decision based on data and analysis, not on the lives of real people. 4,000 civilians had died because of that signature, including a 16-year-old girl named Luna Drexus. Now he was about to meet her father. The command center doors opened with a soft hiss. Daniel stepped into a room that took his breath away. It was enormous, with ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Screens covered every wall, showing star maps and battle plans. Communication stations buzzed with activity as rebel officers. Coordinated operations across 17 star systems. At the center of it all stood Kale Drexus. Daniel understood immediately why this man had been able to unite so many worlds in rebellion. Drexus was almost 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms that looked like they could tear apart steel. Parts of his body had been replaced with cybernetic implants that gleamed silver against his scarred skin. His face told the story of a man who had seen too much pain and decided to give it back to the world. But it was his eyes that made Daniel pause. They burned with an intelligence that was both brilliant and dangerous. These were not the eyes of a simple warlord who wanted power. These were the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by destroying his enemies. When Drexus turned to look at Daniel, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Every person stopped what they were doing to watch. The air felt heavy with tension. "So," Drexus said, and his voice was like grinding metal, "the Empire sends their pet human to break me with words." He took a step closer to Daniel. "Do you know what I did to the last Imperial diplomat who came here?" Daniel did not step back or look away. "You gave him a quick death, more mercy than the Empire showed your daughter." The room went completely silent. Every rebel soldier, every officer, every person in the command center stopped breathing. They all knew that Daniel had just said something that could get him killed in the next few seconds. Drexus's cybernetic hand moved toward the plasma rifle on his back. The weapon was huge, designed to punch holes through armored vehicles. It would turn a human into vapor in an instant. But his hand stopped before reaching the weapon. "How dare you speak of her?" Drexus whispered, but his voice carried clearly through the silent room. "Because someone should," Daniel replied, and his voice was steady despite the danger. "Someone should remember Luna Drexus. Someone should say her name and honor what she tried to do." Daniel took a step closer to the towering warlord. Around them, weapons were being drawn and aimed at him, but he ignored them all. Luna Drexus, age 16. She died in the Imperial bombardment of Colony 7, along with 4,000 other innocent people. The Empire called it acceptable collateral damage in their fight against smugglers. Drexus's cybernetic arm made a whirring sound as his fist clenched. Anger and pain fought for control of his scarred features. Those smugglers were bringing medicine to plague victims. My daughter was helping distribute medical supplies to sick children. "I know," Daniel said, and for the first time since entering the room, his voice carried genuine pain. The intelligence report was wrong. The people on Colony 7 were not criminals. They were heroes trying to save lives during a plague outbreak. Then why did the Empire bomb them? Drexus demanded. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Around him, he could feel the hatred of everyone in the room. They all wanted to kill him for what the Empire had done. But they were waiting to hear his answer, because I told them to, Daniel said finally. The silence that followed was like the quiet before a storm. Drexus stared at Daniel with growing understanding and rage. "I was the intelligence analyst who classified Colony 7 as a legitimate military target," Daniel continued. "I was the one who recommended immediate bombardment based on false reports. I was the one who signed the authorization that killed your daughter." Drexus drew his plasma rifle in one smooth motion and aimed it directly at Daniel's chest. The weapon hummed with deadly energy. One pull of the trigger would end Daniel's life instantly. "Give me one reason why I should not kill you right now," Drexus said through clenched teeth. Daniel looked directly into the weapon's barrel, then back at Drexus's eyes. "Because killing me will not bring Luna back. But maybe, if we work together, we can make sure no other father loses his daughter to Imperial mistakes. You think admitting your crimes makes up for what you did?" Drexus's finger moved to the trigger. "No," Daniel said. I think admitting them is the only way to make sure they never happen again. The weapon stayed aimed at Daniel's heart, but Drexus did not fire. Something in the human's voice had caught his attention. What do you mean? I mean that you and I both know who really gave the final order for that bombardment, Daniel said. His voice got harder. General Marcus Webb of the Imperial Ninth Fleet. The same man who has been promoted to Supreme Military Commander. The same man who is now preparing to destroy every world in your alliance. The plasma rifle wavered slightly in Drexus's hands. Webb is planning what? Operation Clean Slate. Complete orbital bombardment of all 17 rebel worlds. Every man, woman, and child. 40 billion people dead in 3 days. Daniel stepped closer to the weapon that could kill him. That is why I'm here, Kale. Not to stop your rebellion, but to help you stop him. Admiral Hayes spoke from somewhere behind them, her voice filled with disbelief. That is impossible. Even the Empire would not commit genocide on that scale. Daniel reached slowly into his jacket. Every weapon in the room tracked his movement, ready to fire if he pulled out anything dangerous. Instead, he brought out a small data pad and held it where Drexus could see it. Imperial Military Directive 4457X, classified at the highest levels. Daniel said, Webb has convinced Chancellor Morgoth that your rebellion threatens the entire Empire. He says it is better to rule over dead worlds than risk losing control of living ones. Drexus finally lowered his rifle and took the data pad. As he read the information on the screen, his scarred face went pale. Even a man who had seen the worst of Imperial cruelty was shocked by what he was reading. This is madness, Drexus whispered. Even by Imperial standards, this is pure evil. Webb has always been evil, Daniel said. But he is also smart, and he has the Chancellor's trust. Operation Clean Slate begins in 72 hours, unless something stops it. Drexus looked up from the datapad. His eyes were no longer filled with simple rage. Now they showed the complex emotions of a man who had just learned that his enemy might also be his only hope for salvation. Why should I trust you? Drexus asked. Why would you betray your own empire? Daniel was quiet for a long time. He looked around the command center at all the faces watching him. These people had lost their homes, their families, their entire way of life because of Imperial policies. They had every reason to hate him and everything he represented. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief and new determination. Because 16 years ago, I had a daughter too. The words hung in the air like a challenge that changed everything. Every person in the command center felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. This was no longer just about rebellion and empire. This was about fathers who had lost their children, and the pain that connected them across the vastness of space. Drexus still held his plasma rifle, but it was no longer aimed at Daniel's chest. The warlord's cybernetic implants hummed softly as he processed this new information. You had a daughter? Her name was Amy, Daniel said, and his voice was softer now, filled with the kind of pain that never fully heals. She was 15 when she died in a terrorist bombing on Earth. A market square in the middle of the day. She was buying flowers for her mother's birthday. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he remembered that day. I threw myself into Imperial service after that. I convinced myself that bringing order to the galaxy would somehow honor her memory. I thought that if I could prevent chaos and rebellion, no other parent would have to feel what I felt. He looked directly at Drexus. It took me years to realize that the kind of order I was helping to create would have horrified Amy. She believed in justice, in protecting innocent people. I became the kind of man who classified innocent people as acceptable casualties. Drexus set his rifle down on a nearby table. The gesture was small, but it meant everything in that moment. It meant he was willing to listen instead of just seeking revenge. How many others were there? Drexus asked quietly. How many other colony settings? Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Too many. I signed authorization for dozens of military actions based on false or incomplete intelligence. I thought I was serving the greater good, but I was just making it easier for men like Webb to do terrible things. Admiral Hayes stepped forward. She had been listening to everything with growing understanding. Why did you stop? Because I finally realized that Amy would not want to be honored with a galaxy built on the bones of innocent people, Daniel said. I started investigating my own decisions. I found pattern after pattern of mistakes, of rushed judgments, of choosing violence. Over-understanding. He gestured around the command center. Every person in this rebellion has a story like yours, Kale. Families destroyed by imperial policies. Worlds abandoned when they were no longer profitable. People crushed by a system that sees them as numbers instead of lives. Drexus walked over to the main tactical display. It showed the positions of Imperial and Rebel fleets across 17 star systems. Millions of ships, billions of people, all caught up in a war that was about to become something much worse. Even if I believe you about Webb's plan, Drexus said, what can we do? The Imperial fleet has 10 times more ships than we do. Their weapons are more advanced. Their soldiers are better trained. We do not fight the fleet, Daniel replied. We fight the man commanding it. Hayes looked confused. How do you fight a supreme military commander? Daniel smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, it was not a sad smile. The same way I have been fighting corruption and injustice for the past 10 years. With information, patience, and the understanding that every person has something they care about more than their job. He walked over to the tactical display and pointed to the Imperial fleet positions. Webb is not just planning genocide. He is also stealing from the Empire. For the past 3 years, he has been selling weapons to both sides of various conflicts throughout the galaxy. He makes money from Imperial contracts, then sells the same weapons to rebels and pirates. Drexus's scarred face showed interest for the first time. You can prove this? I have been building a case against him for months, Daniel said. Financial. Records, communication logs, shipping manifests. Everything needed to prove that the Empire's supreme military commander is a war profiteer and a traitor. But if you already have evidence against him, why has he not been arrested? Hayes asked. Daniel's expression grew grim. Because Webb is careful. He only communicates through secure channels. He uses shell companies and false identities. Most importantly, he has been successful in his military campaigns. The Chancellor trusts him. Then how does that help us? Drexus wanted to know. Because Webb has one weakness, Daniel said. He is proud. He thinks he is smarter than everyone else. He believes his position makes him untouchable. Daniel paused, and he hates me personally. Hayes and Drexus exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand what Daniel had in mind. 10 years ago, I was the one who recommended Webb for promotion to general, Daniel continued. I wrote the reports that praised his tactical abilities. I helped create the monster that is now planning to commit genocide. Why did you do that? Drexus asked. Because I thought military success was more important than moral character. Webb won battles, so I supported him. I ignored the reports about his cruelty to prisoners. I dismissed the complaints about his treatment of civilian populations. I told myself that victory justified everything. Daniel sat down heavily in a nearby chair. The weight of his past decisions seemed to press down on him like a physical burden. When did you realize your mistake? Hayes asked gently. 3 years ago. I was investigating reports of weapons smuggling in the outer sectors. Every trail led back to the same source, but the identity was hidden behind layers of false companies and fake names. It took me months to trace it all the way back to Webb. Daniel looked up at Drexus and Hayes. By then, he had already been promoted to Supreme Military Commander. He had the Chancellor's complete trust. Any accusations against him would have been dismissed as jealousy or political maneuvering. So you decided to wait, Drexus said, understanding the strategy. I decided to build an ironclad case, something so overwhelming that even the Chancellor could not ignore it. Daniel stood up and walked back to the tactical display. But I also knew that Webb would eventually plan something so terrible that immediate action would be necessary. Operation Clean Slate, Hayes said. Operation Clean Slate, Daniel agreed. The perfect crime that will also be his downfall. Drexus studied the human carefully. What do you need from us? Time, Daniel said, and trust. Webb's fleet will arrive in this system in 72 hours. When they do, I need to be able to contact him directly. You want to talk to the man who is planning to commit genocide? Hayes looked shocked. I want to give him a choice, Daniel corrected. He can proceed with his plan and face the consequences. Or he can find a way to blame the cancellation on circumstances beyond his control. Drexus was quiet for several minutes, thinking through all the implications. Finally, he spoke. If this fails, my people die. All of them. If we do nothing, your people die anyway, Daniel pointed out. At least this way, they have a chance. The warlord looked around his command center. These people had followed him through years of desperate fighting. They trusted him to make the right decisions. The weight of 40 billion lives rested on his shoulders. What do you need us to do? Drexus asked finally. Daniel felt a surge of hope. For the first time in years, he believed that he might be able to prevent a tragedy instead of just analyzing it afterward. First, we need to prepare for Webb's arrival. He will expect to find you desperate and defeated. Instead, he needs to see strength and unity. And then, Hayes wanted to know, then we give the Supreme Military Commander a choice between disgrace and genocide, Daniel said. And we hope that somewhere deep inside Marcus Webb, there is still enough humanity left to make the right decision. The three of them stood together in front of the tactical display, watching the slow movement of fleets across the galaxy. In 72 hours, they would know if words could truly be more powerful than weapons. The fate of 40 billion people would depend on one conversation. The Imperial Dreadnought Dominion hung in space like a metal moon. It was the largest warship ever built, with enough weapons to destroy entire planets. Its hull was black as the void between stars, marked only by the golden eagle of the Empire. Inside the ship's command center, General Marcus Webb stood before a massive holographic display showing the rebel territories. Webb was a tall man with cold gray eyes that seemed to see everything as either useful or expendable. His uniform was perfect, every medal and ribbon placed exactly where regulations demanded. But there was something wrong with his smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed causing pain. Sir, his communications officer announced, we are receiving an incoming transmission from the rebel capital. It is Ambassador Carter. Webb's smile grew wider. Put him through. I want to hear what the Empire's pet diplomat has to say before I turn his new friends into cosmic dust. Daniel's image appeared on the main screen. Behind him, the rebel command center was clearly visible. Cale Drexus and Admiral Hayes stood beside him, showing that the rebels were not afraid to be seen with their Imperial visitor. Hello, Marcus, Daniel said calmly. It has been a long time. Not long enough, Carter, Webb replied with obvious hatred. Have you come to watch your rebel friends die? I promise it will be quick. Well, mostly quick. Actually, I have come to offer you a choice, Daniel said. His voice was steady, but there was steel underneath the calm surface. You can cancel Operation Clean Slate and retire with honor, or you can proceed and face the consequences. Webb laughed, and the sound echoed through the Dominion's bridge. His officers shifted uncomfortably at their stations. They had never heard their commander laugh like that before. It was not the laugh of a sane man. Consequences? Webb said, when? He stopped laughing. From a handful of rebels and a washed-up diplomat? You are even more foolish than I thought, Carter. The consequences will not come from the rebels, Marcus, Daniel replied. They will come from the Empire itself. Daniel gestured to someone. Off-screen. Suddenly, new images began appearing on the transmission. Documents, recorded conversations, financial records, shipping manifests. The bridge crew of the Dominion stared at the information flowing across their screens. Did you know that Imperial Intelligence has been investigating your private business deals for 6 months? Daniel asked. 17 billion credits in illegal weapon sales to both sides of various conflicts. Arms dealing while wearing an Imperial uniform is still considered treason, is it not? Webb's face went pale. His perfect composure cracked. For just a moment. Those records are classified. How did you get access to them? I have had friends in Imperial Intelligence for 30 years, Marcus, Daniel said. Did you really think you could hide your corruption forever? Every shell company, every false identity, every secret bank account. We found them all. The bridge. Officers were staring at their general now. They had followed him into battle many times, believing they were serving the Empire with honor. Now they were learning that their commander was a criminal who had been stealing from the very institution they had sworn to protect. You are lying, Webb snarled, but uncertainty crept into his voice for the first time. Am I? Daniel asked calmly. Check your private communications, Marcus. I think you will find several urgent messages from Chancellor Mordeth's office. Messages that arrived about 12 hours ago. Webb's hands shook slightly as he accessed his personal communication system. His face went through several changes as he read the messages. First confusion, then fear, then rage, and finally a kind of desperate resignation. This is impossible, Webb whispered. The Chancellor received copies of all the evidence yesterday morning, Daniel continued, along with a detailed analysis of how Operation Clean Slate would destabilize the galactic economy and destroy the Empire's reputation forever. Daniel leaned forward slightly on the screen. You have two choices, Marcus. You can proceed with your genocide plan and face immediate court-martial for treason and war crimes. Or you can stand down your fleet, accept early retirement, and disappear to some quiet colony world where you can spend your stolen money in peace. Webb looked around his bridge. Every officer was watching him with new eyes. They no longer saw a heroic military commander. They saw a corrupt criminal who had betrayed everything they believed in. He could feel their loyalty draining away, like water through a broken dam. This is not over, Carter, Webb said through clenched teeth. Yes, it is, Daniel replied with absolute certainty. Your war is over, Marcus. The only question now is whether you want to end it as a disgraced traitor or as a general who chose to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. On the screen, Kale Drexus stepped forward. The massive warlord looked directly at Webb with eyes that burned with controlled anger. General Webb, Drexus said in his deep, gravelly voice, I am prepared to negotiate an immediate ceasefire. The Free Worlds Alliance is willing to discuss terms for rejoining the Empire, provided certain protections are put in place for civilian populations. Webb stared at the man he had been ordered to destroy. Drexus was offering him a way out that would save face for everyone involved. The rebellion would end, the Empire would be preserved, and 40 billion people would continue to live. But Webb's pride fought against accepting help from rebels. His hatred of Daniel Carter burned in his chest like acid. Everything he had worked for, everything he had stolen, everything he had planned was falling apart because of one man's investigation. Sir, his aide asked quietly, What are your orders?" Webb looked around the bridge one more time. He saw doubt in every face, fear in every eye. These officers would not follow him into genocide, now that they knew the truth about him. If he gave the order to attack, they might refuse to obey. Or worse, they might arrest him on the spot. Slowly, reluctantly, Webb reached for his fleet communications control. "All Imperial vessels," he said, his voice barely controlled. "This is General Webb. Stand down from attack positions and prepare for ceasefire negotiations." The relief on the bridge was immediate and obvious. Officers who had been preparing to commit mass murder were now preparing for peace talks. They looked at each other with something approaching gratitude. On the main screen, Daniel Carter nodded respectfully. "A wise decision, General. History will remember this as the day you chose to save lives instead of destroying them." The transmission ended, leaving Webb alone with his thoughts and his shame. Within hours, he would receive official orders relieving him of command and offering him the choice between retirement and court-martial. He would choose retirement, disappearing to a distant agricultural world where he would spend the rest of his days tending gardens and trying to forget the man he had become. 3 days later, Daniel stood with Drexus and Hayes on the observation deck of the rebel flagship. The stars seemed brighter somehow, no longer overshadowed by the threat of genocide. Imperial and rebel ships moved in joint formations around them, the first step toward a new kind of peace. "How long have you been planning this?" Drexus asked. "Since the day I learned about Operation Clean Slate," Daniel answered. "Sometimes the best way to stop a war is not to fight it, but to remove the people who profit from it." Drexus was quiet for a moment, watching the mixed fleet through the observation windows. "What happens now?" "Now we build something better." Daniel said, "The Empire needs reform, not destruction. Your rebellion proved that people will fight for their rights when pushed too far. Now we need to make sure they never get pushed that far again." Admiral Hayes nodded in agreement. The rebellion was never about conquest or revenge. It was about having a voice in our own government, about being treated like citizens instead of subjects. Daniel smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had worn in years. "Then let us make sure your voices are heard from now on." As the three of them watched, Imperial and Rebel representatives began shuttling between ships for the peace negotiations. It would take months to work out all the details, but the foundation was already being laid for a new kind of galactic government, one based on cooperation instead of domination, on justice instead of power. 6 months later, the Galactic Peace Accords were signed on New Terra. The agreement established new protections for civilian populations and created the first inter-system council with representation from both Imperial and former Rebel worlds. Cale Drexus was elected as the council's first chairman, while Admiral Brooke Hayes became the head of the reformed Imperial Navy. Daniel Carter returned to Earth, where he visited a small cemetery outside the capital city. He knelt beside a gravestone marked Amy Carter, beloved daughter, and finally felt that he had honored her memory in the way she would have wanted. "I kept my promise, sweetheart," he whispered to the stone. "I found a way to protect people, instead of destroying them." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers he had placed on the grave. For a moment, Daniel could almost imagine it was Amy's way of telling him she was proud. Words, after all, were only as powerful as the love and truth that gave them meaning. And sometimes that was more than enough to change the galaxy.